humans, and welcome to Bonus Audioface. We're an irreverent podcast about music news and culture that mostly matters. I'm Sean.
I'm Dan.
This is our annual State of the Music episode 2021.
State of the music industry, state of the music business, state of the sound of music. We, of course, folks.
The hills are alive.
Yes. Oh God. Folks, we started Audioface in May of 2017, and so our first one of these was in March or February, maybe even April of 2018.
Yes.
And so we've been doing for these. Now, definitely, I'll say it. First time we did it, I was just like, that's a dumb idea. Let's just be assholes. And it's like, hey, this is what music sounds like. And we ended up being right about a lot of things. Definitely not, maybe, I don't know if about that one per se, but I think we were pretty, relatively accurate. But after that, every single year, we've just been hitting bangers after bangers
19 and
after
20
bangers.
have been pretty spot on.
Your, Rock is Dead thing that just, killed rock, just, shot it in the face, John Wilkes Booth style. But your, I guess I'm not going to continue the analogy. When you said rock is dead, that was, fairly true. But then you also said that India is going to be the place where, rock resurfaces. And now, as we're about to do this episode, I think indie is just the most interesting genre that we talk about and do on Audioface on a daily basis. And it remains to be. But that being said, when we have these conversations, we usually start with pop music because it's just definitionally popular.
It's what's most listened to.
Yeah, over the past 4 years or so, we've kind of tried to figure out what is the sound of pop. Because pop itself doesn't have a sound. It's changed based on the time periods, based on what is popular in other genres. And so, whereas in the early 10s, in the mid-10s, you're definitely saying pop was taking a bit of a trappy, sort of R&B, electronic kind of thing. It's then since sort of established that most of pop is a little slight iteration of neo-pop, what we used to call R&B.
Yes.
But it's very just watered down to be as pop, simple, constructed as possible. But that is kind of to say that neo-pop and R&B have, through through trap, essentially, and through the similarities in that, has started to permeate pop music even more. So, at least right now, because pop isn't a genre that changes very much from time to time, I think that it's going to stay kind of neo-poppy for this year and maybe even the next year.
Well, I think pop is going more experimental. You have bigger artists and stuff trying different stuff. You have obviously Billie Eilish is the biggest one of basically doing her own thing within the pop genre and doing different sounds, and it's becoming pretty big. You're going to have more and more artists that are doing that. They're collaborating with different artists. They're collaborating with completely left field stuff that we've been seeing the past 6 months. Really, you've seen a lot. And with COVID restrictions, slowly breaking down and stuff, you're going to have even more collaborations between international artists and stuff where you can actually go and it's easier to meet up. So I think that's one thing that there's going to be more experimentation within pop. You're still going to have your general parameters, your general rule of thumb within pop. It's so there's always going to be your blandness. There's always going to be your boringness within there, but there's more and more exciting stuff that comes out of it. Yeah, you have the neo-pop stuff, which I'm seeing a little bit more. Hyperpop is something I'm thinking that's going to come in more within that glitchy sound when you start to collaborate with more producers and stuff. That was one of the things I was really sad with Sophie's untimely death. So I really wanted to see what she could have done to help with other artists and other popular artists to really experiment and push that sound a little bit further.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, she's definitely was, and I think you can say that she did enough of a job while she was alive to say that she pioneered the sound of, not hyperpop in general, but pop becoming more hyperpop by literally being a hyperpop producer and working with a bunch of pop artists from Nicki Minaj to Madonna to Vince Staples and Kendrick Lamar, Flume, just working with other artists in other genres to just plant a seed of your sound and then make it take bloom in other genres.
Exactly.
So to the extent that if pop gets more experimental, maybe Billie Eilish was an example of that a couple years ago, where you kind of just subtract things from the music and make it poppy. I think it might go a little more in a hyper pop direction.
I can see that.
But the caveat is that even you, for example, there are hyper pop things you review. They're just I can't.
It's the thing with hyper pop. It's very niche. It's still new. People haven't really heard about it much. Obviously, you like it because it's a genre that you enjoy. So
and I kind of
been exposed to it more.
I won't say I discovered. I discovered it for myself very early on as the genre was in its infancy.
Yes.
So I have some a connection of it as it's going on for sure.
So,
but what I'm getting at is to make hyperpop more palatable and a broader sense again, to make it pop again. on the one hand, it's against what hyperpop goes because it's like a punk. It's like how do you make punk more mainstream? It's like
you can't.
Right. So like the more and more you water down hyperpop, the less it's hyperpop, right?
Exactly.
But I think there still is room for you to work within those major constraints that you have working in pop and still making it, even just like using the instrumentation or borrowing some of the sounds and putting it in a standard time signature might be a little bit experimental. But I don't know, like when Audioface, like we review pop albums as they come on because like they're popular, people will listen to this, okay, let's review it. But 9 times out of 10, we're pretty largely disappointed. I mean, we've had some like pleasant surprises
had some decent ones,
of like Taylor Swift being better than we expected.
Yeah. But she went more in indie direction with her stuff. So that's another thing too. I can see more pop artists exploring into indie now too, because of like Taylor Swift, a couple others. Those ones with musical backgrounds, not just the industry plants of shit like Ariana Grande and whatnot. She's not going to work with fucking indie artists. But ones who were generally decent musicians and stuff, they just happen to be in a genre that's not very explorative. I could see them going more into like pop, or not pop, but more indie, hyper pop, a bunch of other things of experimenting and trying to blossom out their stuff.
So it's really good you mentioned that because I think Charlie XCX might be the best person here.
Perfect example.
Yeah, because
she did this. She just did the track we reviewed last week with Spinning with No Roman 1925. Both of those are like indie pop artists. So within there, she's one of those musicians that's very talented and has been around for a while now and has contributed to a bunch of different artists. Now I could see her going more into that indie route and stuff, but experimenting with it. Indie electronica.
So Charlie XCX with her How I'm Feeling Now Quarantine EP, and then Next Level Charlie before that.
Yes,
that was very clearly like we're taking maybe less of the Quarantine album, but definitely Next Level Charlie was almost like a sort of hyper pop take or like a very rough electronic take on pop music, and it landed pretty well. Like there was that album along with there's like some contemporary pop albums that had really landed really well, like Charlie XCX, Dua Lipa, Katy Perry, Lady Gaga. And many of those took some electronic, albeit not necessarily hyperpop, but electronic influences. So I think there are definitely artists there who see along the lines of where we're going from and are going to hit it very well. I think now that we mentioned it, Charlie XCX is the one I like put most of my hopes on for their next project. Maybe not this year, maybe next year, to really push the boundaries of what is acceptable in pop and how cool you can make pop sound. How different you can make it sound. And I was kind of touching on, if you're ready to move on, to go on to electronic music because hyperpop, electronic music makes up hyperpop itself. It's just like that's where the influence is. And I was kind of thinking as I was writing this, that's why the gibberish is there, that in the 10s, electronic music was seeing a second renaissance, but not kind of the renaissance we would have wanted, right?
No, because with electronic music, as both of us grew up listening to it, I really grew up listening to house, French touch, if you all know what that is. I really grew up listening to that stuff.
Both of our first albums that we purchased were Daft Punk albums.
Yeah, there you go.
That gives you everything you need to know.
Yeah, because you could see it slowly building up, especially in Europe, not so much in America and the States, but more overseas, of like in the late 90s, early 2000s, really like that house music scene and whatnot. A lot of people trying to almost copy like the French touch stuff, that it started to get a little bit samey, but then people would start to branch out on that. And then it got a little bit bland kind of in the mid 2000s. And then in the 10s, you really started to see a surgence of more of like the EDM staples and stuff. And at the beginning of the 10s, it could kind of gone two ways. It could have gone more into the creative way, or it could have gone just to the hypey-typey shit that I personally don't like, and the stuff that we've criticized a lot. And that's what the direction it took, unfortunately. Got really commercialized and stuff. But within 2021, as more and more people start to experiment within music, as more and more people start to understand the constructions that they can with electronic music and all that, and as more equipment comes out, as computers become more powerful, as equipment becomes easier and cheaper to obtain as well, depending on the equipment, obviously, I'm hoping to see more experimentation within electronic music, especially within hyperpop, as something that you're going to hear a lot on this take, or in the take for the whole thing in general. Because within there, you can do a lot of different glitchy sounds. You can do a lot of things of chopping up your own stuff and then making it almost an industrial sound, but pushing that a little bit further to then brush off the rough edges of all of the industrial sounds and the glitchiness, because that's something that is hard to listen to if you're not used to it. But within there, it's in its infancy right now, and you can push that and then go on further within that, and then use that to then contribute to indie artists, to pop artists, to trap artists, to so many different styles of music within the music industry as a whole. Electronic music can have such a huge impact in pushing music forward and pushing newer artists up into getting, people who don't necessarily have like the musical education, but then they can go up and be like, hey, I'm slowly getting into this stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a lot.
Yeah.
I can go there.
There's so much you said there that I agree with. One being electronic music. I think we can both say that with the past 10 years of electronic music, we've largely been a little disappointed.
Yeah, because there's a lot of good, like Chuck 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 Moon Boots. There's a lot of electronic that is good. There's a lot of electronic that is bad.
The vast majority of it. And so if I could tell like a preemptive Andrew Cuomo style biography of how it happened.
No.
Of like describing something as a past event as it's still happening.
Yeah.
I think, electronic music, the story of the decade has been with folks like Avicii kind of taking the sound and making like a big band thing.
Yeah.
And then kind of went out of control where you have like your Skrillexes, your Diplos out there who are just selling all these concerts, constantly touring,
that just
making barely iterative kind of music that like, good, it's crowd pleasers, but ultimately it's kind of dull. But
it's extremely dull.
That was powered by the fact that you had this economy in the 10s that was powered by, okay, the only way, like all the things were happening in perfect balance. The only way artists were able to really get revenue in for them was going to concerts.
Yes.
These festivals were making a lot of money for companies like Live Nation and Insomniac. And then come 2020, gone.
Yes.
Like a vacuum. And so, again, this is my like trying to write history as it's happening thing. I would like to think that for artists, this sort of break from the music, for the good ones, for the ones who like, are always in it about the art and pushing it forward. This is going to be a time for them to reset it. It's going to be time for them to really rethink about the sound and how to make it like the things you were saying earlier.
I mean, well,
appeal to classical, make electronic music that has tinges of classical, tinges of rock, things that can actually start to influence and permeate and push genres. But you're going to have a couple who I think are going to show their faces and are going to be like, people will be over them very easily.
For sure.
Who are going to return back to this concert scene with electronic music that just balls. And there's just like not going to be good. And then there's going to be all these other artists around there that are going to be much more interesting for people.
For sure. I mean, you saw with Disclosure's album how much they pushed their own sound further and did a lot of experimentation with a bunch of different like Afro beats and things that they haven't experimented with before.
They made a true world music dance.
Exactly. So that's something that you can do. And I'm hoping more and more people can do albums within that regard. Obviously not the same, but still trying to push it further to where it's something pretty new in that regard.
Electronic music, this is what I wrote, could be like the heart of the music industry.
100%.
And that like its blood, its references kind of circulate throughout the rest of the body, all the other genres. As you mentioned with hyperpop going into pop, but also these electronic aspects and synths making it more into alternative. That's what alternative was a lot like, but we'll get more on that in a moment. But you're seeing more electronic influences to where there are some bands and artists who are getting to the point where they're blending electronic and alternative perfectly to create a totally new thing.
Yes.
Your Yves Tumors, your Genesis Owuzes, they're just like whole new sounds using electronic. And so that's the best of what it can do.
That's the best, the brilliantness of it is trying something so radically different that you stand out as your own artist. And then you make your own sound. So then, idiot reviewers like ourselves can then go on and be like, this sounds like Genesis Owuzu, this sounds like Yves Tumor, so on and so forth, of this completely different sound that nobody else has. So you can make your trademark on that.
I'm looking forward to more orchestral sounding dance music that sounds like it reminds me of like it's electronic music, and Deadmau5 could do this at a certain point, but it's electronic music that reminds you of the concert, like classical concert experience, with the way it's set up, with the way the music sort of travels and grows and expands in emotion. Electronic music gives you that canvas, I think, where you don't have to rely so much on words or other things that make a song construction work, and you can do these long pieces with like fugues and all these other different things. Electronic music will be the cool area of that as it happens, I think.
Moving on, I think we can move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to indie /rock /alt rock area.
Because
So
rock is barely like a bit like we will cover it on Audioface, but it's like barely the genre to be there. It's like the parent genre. We know it's like related, but alternative and indie are really like where it's at
for sure. So
much so that like things we used to very early on Audioface, we're doing these comparisons. We would say like, no, this is rock versus no, this is alternative. It's harder and harder to do that now.
It is. So the thing with like alternative rock, I really realize, or alternative as a genre has gone very electronic, but in the bad way. It's going through a phase to me where it's going into that like late 10s style of electronic-ish music where everything's becoming bland and overused, and the samples you can hear are pretty similar. The construction music is pretty similar. You can hear that if you go to the alt radio stations and stuff throughout. You got your satellite radios, your local radio stations and stuff. Whenever I go on there to kind of hear a sound,
yeah, it's like an electric droning.
It's very. Everybody's trying to make the same sound. Even newer artists and stuff, they're all coming up, but they're making okay music. Like Gus Epperton, decent musician, but some of this latest work and stuff I've listened to, I go, there's a lot of other artists that already have made that past 2 years, and they're just trying to, I don't know if I cash in on it or they lack the creativity, or the producers lack the creativity to push it further and stuff. So alt is in this really awkward phase right now where it can either just go that, revert back to its older sound, like your Kings of Leon sound and stuff, if more artists make that and push it forward, which I'm hoping that's what happens, because you can still have this vacuum of perfect alternative rock. It can be made. It's just not too many artists are making it. Or it could go down this hole where then it ends up dying out, where alt ends up just being this vacuum of a lot of like older artists and stuff, your Foo Fighters and whatnot, kind of going in and not really doing much, and your newer artists and stuff just trying to sound like Sacred Heart's Lonely Club in 2017 for some God knows why reason. Yeah, for God knows why reason you want to sound like that. And then out of that, you have indie.
Oh, I mean, if I could just start really, because you said a lot of really interesting things, and I hadn't really thought of it in that way.
Because it's something I listen to all the time.
So. Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely say that I've noticed that. Like, I'll take an artist I discovered last year, Frank Moody.
Okay.
Alternative, kind of like taking that funk sort of like sound with things, but I call it Instagram ad alternative because for some reason
that's a
very
like, good.
I think
analogy.
I think because I more than like I'd say I'd be in the 5% of people who do this because of me doing this podcast. My integration with Spotify and Instagram is very tight, so I'm sure they know about everything I listen to or even pretend to listen to. And so all of my like Spotify ads will be towards these like alternative bands that like all are starting to kind of drone into the same one thing. It's like how, I mean, we talk about this a lot in trap and pop because I think those are the two genres where this tends to happen the most blatantly, where just like, oh, let's come in, someone with like half an amount of talent and let's like go in there and make a song. And you know, it all sounds the same anyways, we'll be good. They'd actually go out and try to like make music like that. I don't think it's good in any way, but an alternative, unfortunately, the alternative genre is very susceptible to that kind of thing happening as well. And so there's just like an influx. I think I remember there's one band, maybe I forget exactly what they were called, but we reviewed them. It was like their first album, and you're like, yeah, it's fine, it's alternative, but it's like not really different from 2013 style alternative, right? And I think there are a lot of bands like that are signed to fancy labels and doing the damn thing, but the music they're creating is too much of a copy of the stuff they liked from like the Arctic Monkeys in the early 10s or whatever, and it's not something that's new. So that's definitely a good red flag, I think, that I would like look out for is like, okay, this is alternative music, but are we pushing alternative music in a different direction? Like, are we really embracing the label of alternative, which used to be similar to R&B, just a catch-all for we don't know what to call this.
Exactly. So the thing with that too is that's kind of the issues with electronic music is people will get these things. That's what happens when you end up giving it to the masses. There's people who will use it in the right way, I want to say the right ways, but in the more creative directions, the way they try and experiment with it. They do things that no one else does with electronics. And then there's other ones where people go and hire a producer that has produced shit music for, 20 years. And they just end up doing the same thing and becoming really bland. And that's what's been happening with alt a lot in that way. But then you have indie, which is just continues to blossom to be the bedrock now of rock, which is ironic. You have artists like B2B, Phoebe Bridgers, a lot of women artists.
Japanese Breakfast, Japanese House.
Exactly. You have so many artists that are they're doing a lot of throwback sounds. You have a lot of 80s sounds, a lot of 90s sounds, but they're pushing it forward. They're doing stuff, and that whole construction of that is way more rocky.
Yeah, they're modernizing it. They're rethinking it. They're making me like honestly fall in love with like grunge and like 80s like synth. Like there was, I call it like there's 80s rock where you have some like synth drums and some little things just like thrown there as flourishes, but it's very like kind of slight. And then I think with Gorillaz' Plastic Beach in 2010, I think some people took the wrong messages from that. Was that it was an album that was like, it's an alternative band making himself fully synthetic, but it's like synthetic as a concept. It's synthetic as we're going to embrace this because this is the whole idea of Concept Plastic Beach. Not make all of your alternative music as synthy as possible, because
that's the issue.
That was a purpose in Plastic Beach, and it made sense because it's trying to create a synthetic plastic world and put you in it, and embracing that it's true. But that's why concept albums work, is that they take kind of an out of sight concept that may not work for music in general. But they put it in 12 songs or so that really paint a picture for you.
Yes.
You can't make all alternative music like super synthy, or else like it just gets bland.
And that's what's been going on. And then with indie, you have indie electronica now coming up. You have more you have so many younger artists that they're mainly coming up through indie. I'd like to say either like trap indie are the two biggest ones, where artists in their early 20s, late teens are really coming up and shining through, and they're exploding on the scene. They're using more normalized instruments, you know, your guitars, drum, whatever, your normal instruments on top of using electronic for certain artists. Some won't even do that. They'll use more bedroom pops and stuff.
Controller
here. Right. So there's it's looking up still for indie. I think indie is still going to expand and grow upon it. I hope now with the kind of like the grunge sound of last year, I hope you hear a little bit, a little bit of that, but then more of experimentation.
My question about indie is that like, I mean, even indie is now like slowly becoming the alternative catch-all for things, right? Where we use it to describe,
definitely is.
We basically use it to describe, well, this would be pop or this would be trap, but it just has so much more of what we want from it, as in like some amount of like experimentation and difference that it no longer, like we have to separate it from the other genre.
Well, that's my thing with saying that pop artists are going to be going more into indie too, the ones that are talented musicians, because that is really where most of the creativity to me in the music industry right now is in indie, because that's where some of the best music we've heard throughout the past 2 years really has come out of indie. So it's still going to be your bread and butter of all the new sounds, all the new things that you're going to hear in this year is going to originate from there in some way or some form, and then blossom out into different genres and different people. So
I think, because the part of my other question was like, indie's also a catch-all, but also like, what will make indie not indie? Like, what will make indie pop in the truest like deconstruction of the words? What will make independent, small, kind of like random things popular? And to me, the obvious answer is social media. Because like that's how Biba Doobie blew up.
Biba Doobie, exactly. She blew up because you're also in the age, because we can even go straight into this now.
Might as well. Yes, the music industry as it works more broadly.
You're getting, even though I don't use it because I still don't really understand it because I'm too much of a millennial old man Sean.
You don't need to understand TikTok. Just let it happen.
But with TikTok, you're having so many artists blow up because of that. You're having a lot of bedroom pop, a lot of indie, then you have a lot of alt stuff, a lot of like neo pop or other things pop up through TikTok. That's how a lot of people are, oh, I've heard this scene on this. Oh, I've heard this from this video and this or that, because you have all these stupid dances and things that then blow up an artist.
And it works for whatever, like, okay, Drake released some songs a couple weeks ago, and now those are blowing up on TikTok, because, like, of course. But you're finding artists who are creating, like, cool beats and cool things. Like, I found artists off of TikTok, or TikTok songs go viral. I go on Spotify, they have 300,000 listeners maybe, and then I'm just, like, part of the cool thing. So I think,
then out of nowhere, then they blow up to, like, 300 million.
Yeah. I like that indie and like other genres like that now have new avenues just go like hyper popular, and then use that, artists can use that for themselves as power they don't need from record labels to then continue their own careers.
And then going on to like the industry more broadly, literally.
As we are.
So things that I've I'm still going to be, we're still going to be seeing shorter albums.
For sure.
I still think this past week was kind of an anomaly with 3 longer albums. You can have a longer album like your Kings and Leons and so on if they're all cohesive. Usually they're longer tracks and stuff, which is fine with me. But there's a lot of artists that are making a lot shorter things to be concise. That way they can release more into like cycles. That way they can make more money in that regard. In other ways, artists are doing it because they realize that they don't want to have one specific sound and then keep going on with that. They want to have shorter like periods of time of, okay, hey, I have this sound and kind of this idea for this one. Let me then move on to another thing, because maybe you have 2 or 3 ideas going into one work, but you know it's not going to be cohesive, which is what I'm seeing a bit more from a lot of artists.
Oh yeah, 2021 is the year of the drop. I'm definitely calling it here
the drop,
now.
Yeah.
We created the term drop as like we were noticing this phenomenon where artists were releasing sub 30-minute projects that felt more complete and thought out than like 50-minute albums we were reviewing. So we're like, okay, let's focus on this a little bit. But now it's become the norm as like attention spans have gotten shorter, as songs in general have like started to get rearranged to not have choruses and things like that. We're moving to an era where like artists are thinking of songwriting and even music writing as, hey, these are even ever more ephemeral experiences as attention spans get like weaker and weaker. Hopefully that maybe changes in a different direction over the next decade more broadly, so that's less music. I am positive in thinking that like the shorter albums thing will be good in the sense that I think it's going to bring the average album shorter. I think Culture 3, should we get it, will not be an hour-and-a-half banger like the last time. But I think, yeah, it's pushing artists to be creative within that short amount of time. And then it's also pushing other artists who are like a little bit more mature in their careers to think about, okay, maybe I only need 45 minutes or 50 minutes to really make a mark and really make a thing here. And I think those albums are like becoming the masterpieces. The 45-minute album to me is the sweet spot, whereas my old sweet spot might have been like 50.
Yeah, my sweet spot is still like 45, 50, depending on the genre and depending on the artist.
I mean, arguably you could say the sweet spot is 70, which is like around the minutes that an actual LP could hold, right? But we've moved on very much from that.
Yeah,
right
there's
now.
maybe 2 artists who I would like, they drop 70 minutes an album, I'd be like, that's fine.
Yeah. I'll say like I don't want a 70-minute album from any of my favorite artists, especially right now, because all my favorite artists are like mature artists who have been around for a lot, and like I can listen to 70 minutes worth of material.
I could basically have Sigaros be that long because their tracks tend to be 7-8 minutes long.
That's allowable.
So that's allowable. And then I'm trying to think of another one. Maybe Radiohead has their last album.
I already thought, if it's
like, this is it, I'm done, boom. That might be it, but even then, it just depends how long the tracks are. I still, because they usually tend to be 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes, which I still think is really a good sweet spot for a good band. The rest, 30, 35.
Damon, I'm giving you 35 minutes this year. Make it count.
Damon, I'm giving you 3. Make one song, that's it. So streaming services is another thing that is going to have, especially in this decade, as we enter a new decade, it's going to have such a big impact into the industry even more, because you have obviously all of these artists and stuff not getting paid as much, them starting unions and trying to trying to strike deals within streaming platforms where, hey, we need to get paid more. You have services like Bandcamp and SoundCloud that are really pushing forward avenues and stuff to have artists get paid more. So the thing with streaming services, I'm hoping that they're going to adjust their business models to where they can start to pay artists more. It's going to be not this such top-heavy thing like professional golf, where it's like just these guys make a lot of money and the rest don't. It's going to be things that now it's going to be getting out more to the masses, which I'm hoping for. But Daniel Ek is still Daniel Ek, so you never fucking know. So
yeah, capitalists are going to capital. Yeah. That is the whole streaming services thing we talked about last week, how Tidal and SoundCloud are getting into changing their business models from a pro rata, which like we said is the way YouTube does things generally, which is there's a big bucket of money that the streaming platform gets from their subscribers, and they look at a pie chart of which artists are raking up the largest number of views, largest number of listens across the entire platform, and they assign those artists money proportionally. It's definitely not as fair, because that means, okay, just because this artist, however, proportionally on Spotify doesn't have many listens, maybe the people listening to that artist are super devoted and listen to that music all the time. that artist should still be getting paid for the amount of listens they're getting. SoundCloud and maybe Tidal are now moving more towards streaming rules that more equitably distribute the $10 a month or whatever you give that streaming service. And ultimately, convenience will win, but I'm going to tell people some realities about the next decade. Streaming prices are going to go up, 100%. Just off the basis of inflation, but also like...
Because as artists get paid more, you're going to have to pay more of a premium to them.
But here's what I'm saying. Before artists even get paid more, I'm speaking like, let's say in the next 10 years, and this is unfortunately a 40 to 60% likely scenario, nothing changes. Prices are still going to go up. Spotify is going to say, oh no, there's reasons we're offering you a high fidelity tier. Everyone loves high quality streaming. That's why Tidal works.
It's going to be some shit.
Right? Like they're going to make up reasons regardless, and the prices are going to go up regardless. So I'm saying, okay, well, if the prices are going to go up, this is a really good opportunity to go to consumers and say, okay, this is how much something you really like in your life, Spotify, Apple Music, whatever, is going to cost you. And here's how little of it's going to actually your favorite musicians. And so I think there's a lot of room for musicians to mobilize their fans. I mean, there's like Ariana Grande getting people to register to vote and support Bernie Sanders for fuck's sake. Miley Cyrus and Lady Gaga and all these different artists doing the same thing. Killer Mike. Like, it's very possible to do that. I think like a layup for many of these artists is to say, this is how much we're getting screwed. Not only us, but more people need to do what like Colin Greenwood was doing and saying like, we're at the top of our game right now, and we don't see a path for people who were younger, like where we were when we started, to do the same thing. And that's a problem for music long term that we need to, as music fans, preserve for the next generation. Preserve for ourselves even. Because we don't want, ultimately the music, I mean, these things that Tidal and SoundCloud are doing are nice, and we like them and appreciate them. And Bandcamp, of course, I want to shout them out too. But ultimately, the industry will be dictated by the big players and their relationship to the record labels. And so the ball is really in Apple and Spotify's court. And by that, I mean, Apple and Spotify are the folks who need to be pressured the most by the unions, by the musicians, by fans, to make sure that they implement systems that more equitably pay artists, because it's not like they can't afford it.
And then another thing kind of going on that, you have the return basically of live music. It should be this year, like later on in this year with post-COVID concerts. You've already kind of had a little bit like hints and tastes of that at the end of last year and then going into the beginning of this year. But now you're going to have more and more like things become open. You're going to have outdoor venues and stuff becoming open. You're going to have bigger gatherings and stuff be allowed and all of that. And that's going to shape up to then even change certain artists, like their fortunes and stuff. So then maybe they'll have extra time to work on music, or maybe they'll get influenced more because they're able to produce stuff live. And certain artists thrive better in a live format, other artists don't. So that's going to be another thing that will, I think, help push music a little bit further, and it'll help people to get out and to experience more artists, and it'll help a lot of the artists that kind of got stuck, in 2020, a lot of the smaller artists and stuff, to help get them out and dig them up out of the hole and stuff too.
I think people are seeing the writing on the wall, not only us and like listeners of this podcast, but people who are in the music business who have to like plan ahead.
Late
2021, largely 2022, 2023 could be a musical renaissance that like
so
we think about
people.
Historically, like in where like music transcends music culture and gets to culture. Like we think of the 1960s as, in addition to a cultural and social revolution, the music is part of that.
Had a big pack of the cultural revolution in the 60s.
In the like, I'd say not necessarily the 80s itself or the 90s itself, but like 85 to 95 are very clearly defined by like music almost.
Yes.
And I think we're headed to that just because of the societal situations where like COVID-19 is now starting to be handled under control in most places. So you can have concerts going back. There's like pent up demand everywhere in the economy, but especially towards outdoor gatherings with other people. And so how this relates to the music industry is that, the bean counters at Live Nation are going to be making tons of money, sure. But this is a great opportunity for artists and musicians in general, just like, not just do the thing we say all the time, which is push their sound, but take their sound to make it like a cultural moment. Like the sounds that people like, the concerts that are going to be had next year, like
are going to be amazing.
Things, like it's going to be like memories and ours, and like everyone else's like the rest of their lives. It's going to be a really good time. And so, for musicians, the opportunity is there to like make that music count. I don't want us to think of like the glory days of our lives is Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars redoing old like funk like things at a grassy shitty concert in like Indio, California with a bunch of like sweaty people. Like, I don't want that to be the future. I want like let's do some cool things with music and also have fun, I'm hoping.
Yeah.
And the last thing, I guess, I wanted to end on that fun note, but I guess we'll also end on this, is like the fact that there's like a second sort of like Me Too wave happening in music, at least we're telling from earlier this year. And at least the difference from like Me Too as it was just starting in 2017, 2018, where there's like this backlash of, oh wait, actually holding people accountable? We can't do that. We're now starting to see the music industry
is actually holding people accountable.
Yeah.
Like big time, where they'll do it. Labels will cut you off. Your other bandmates, other producers will then start to rat you out on all this shit that you've done, which is good. You want to see more of that. I mean, you don't want to see more of that, obviously, because you don't want more accusations stuff to come out. But stuff that needs to come out needs to get out, and in the best way possible to help all the victims and stuff of abuse and other things that have gone on in the industry, because this industry is pretty shitty and has screwed over a lot of people.
Yeah, it's spewing with abuse. And obviously, like with these things, the caveats have to be made that you want the allegations to be credible in these cases and all these different things. But it's not like there's like the music industry starving for violence, not just sexual violence, but it's like regular violence, but also just like forms of discrimination that make it difficult for people to rise into the ranks easier. I think that you're seeing more accountability on the level of like the people who like have the official names and they're in charge. But ultimately, you still have the fact that the fans are going to do whatever they want to. People will still buy XX-Temptation records. People are still listening to Morgan Wallen. I think this might be the first week. We're recording this at a time. It's not important. But at least 7 weeks in a row, Morgan Wallen's album was #1 on Billboard. And part of that's just like the early part of the year is usually slower for music, but part of that's also there are a lot of country music fans who saw someone say the N-word and supported it. And were like, I like this guy more. And so ultimately there's that fact of there's an audience here. Like we said earlier, there's an audience. You can do a lot of things with this audience. You influence this audience whether you try to or not.
Yes.
And so I think the music industry understands that there are things they can do, but I want that to be a little bit less like cover your ass. I don't want the Country Music Association to say, hey, we did something. I want them to actually like do something, like go, hey, fans of country music, we can have country music and not have like this type of hatred. Why are we like celebrating this? Can we like have a conversation like the conversation that Black people in country music have been wanting to have for years about why the fan base likes this racist red meat? I think those are larger conversations that are like power report conversations at times. But like, I think I'm positively optimistic about the way the music industry is going more towards accountability. But I think the limits of that accountability might be towards where it really matters, which is the fans and their behavior. But overall, like more accountability is better, largely.
Yes.
And so that's something we're probably looking to see into the future, especially into 2021. But that's pretty much our overview of music. Of course, we couldn't cover every single genre. We just covered the genres that we usually do in Audioface Awards. But like, we'll listen to as much of it as we can. Please send us as much of it as you can. So not only y'all, but us, we can have a better sense of music as it's going on. And we can continue to have this like great relationship with the audience and us as music reviewers and like reviewing music and listening to music and experiencing it together. So make sure you do that by following, and not just following and liking, but interacting with us on Twitter and Instagram at AudiofacePod, or on YouTube at youtube.com/AudiofacePod. Occasionally you can talk to us individually and maybe we'll like laugh or something. Sean can be found at SW Suarez on Twitter and Instagram, and I can be found on Twitter at Dan from the Web and on Instagram at Dan from the Internet. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. It's been pretty fun. I like doing these episodes, and we'll, it's a little time capsule. We'll go back and listen to it and go, wow, we were super cocky. Or just go like, wow, we got it spot on. Who knows? That's for the future.
The world may never know.
I mean, the world will know in like 6 months when we look back, but you know. Cheers.
Toodaloo. Just label yourself a comedian and start a podcast and you make money.
I just literally can't look at a camera in the straight face and say I'm a comedian. I think it's better when you surprise people by being funny.
That's
because you set expectations low.
That's my life right there. Yes. What's the bar? It's like all the way down to the floor.
Okay. Well, arguably, when it comes to my standards, sometimes mine are closer to the floor than yours.
Fair play.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.